Bang, I'm on. All right. So, the number is 855-915-WMFO, 855-915-9636. If you'd like to join the conversation, you're welcome to do so. I've been getting calls lately, so that's very encouraging. The program is live casting on YouTube. It also podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and TuneIn, which is a new affiliate for the program. And of course, I blog on this, and I send that out on my blog site. So again, you're listening to WMFO 91.5 AM here in Medford, Boston, Tufts University, the heart of one of America's most liberal college campuses. Here I am, a conservative, or I guess you might say a libertarian conservative, if I must label myself at all. Well, an article has come out about the show in the Tufts Observer by Greta Jocham. She's a student journalist here. It's called Morse Code. It's up. It was published April 10th, and it's available both in print and online. And what I would say is that for the most part, the article is fair and accurate, but it's very difficult and painful personally for me to see myself being called racist and Islamophobic. I mean, these are real serious charges. I mean, this is, it's just, I guess that I think Mike Tyson said it best, in that you can prepare all you want and plan all you want, but then you get hit in the mouth. And that's how I feel when I saw this article. I feel like I've been hit in the mouth. It feels damaging to me personally. It feels damaging to my reputation. It's hurtful to my family. It's hurtful to my image. I would argue that this is just like the kind of thing that you'd throw up like a schoolyard bully. I feel like I'm back in second grade and facing this guy that bullied me back then. Hey, come on out here, Morse. You dirty blankety blank. That's what this feels like to me, And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the article. I'm going to read most of it, if not all of it. I'm going to respond to it, and then I'm going to read a response that I wrote formally to this article. Now, first of all, it says content warning: Islamophobia and racism, which, that's hurtful right off the bat. I mean, come on. It says, on the March 16 episode of Conservative Talk Radio host Chuck Morse Speaks, Trump Travel Ban, which was the title of the program that day, host Chuck Morse said that allowing Muslims into America would change the dynamic of our society. Now, this, first of all, is out of context, because what I said, and I've listened back to the tape, is that we ought to welcome Muslims who are either willing to take an oath of loyalty to the United States and mean it, in a sense that they're willing to disavow practices that are contrary to our way of life. And we ought to welcome in also, or try to welcome in, Muslims who are skillful and who could add to and contribute to our society. And thirdly, we ought to welcome in Muslims who are genuinely, whose lives are at risk. We have a great tradition in this country of welcoming in refugees, and I think that we owe a particular moral debt to Muslims because of the horrendous policies of the Obama administration, which is responsible for this, largely responsible for this awful breakup in Syria and the resulting diaspora and this complex civil war. So because of Obama, I think we have a certain moral obligation to at least try to come up with a solution for the refugees there. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to welcome them into the United States, but we ought to use our influence to make sure that they're either in safe zones or welcome into perhaps other Islamic countries, many of which are wealthy and vast in resources and land, who could welcome them in. I find it quite interesting and curious why they don't welcome them in. And in that regard, I would put exceptions to Jordan, which has welcomed in a lot of refugees, and which ought to be honored for that, and that's a great thing. But I didn't just say that the way this article says we should, not welcome in any Muslim refugees, all right? Then it goes on to say he thinks that Islamic law is not compatible with American democracy and that under the religion, women can be killed. Now, that is something that I stand by. I do question whether or not Islamic law or Sharia law is compatible to our American legal system. This has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with an ideology. When you talk about law, you're talking about an ideology that is accompanying a religion. And to criticize that law and to ask whether or not that law is compatible with American law is perfectly appropriate, in the same way that it's appropriate to say whether Nazism is appropriate to our way of life, or communism is consistent with our way of life. And if you criticize Nazism, it doesn't mean you're criticizing Germans. Criticize communism doesn't mean you're criticizing Russians. It has to do with a set of laws that people embrace. It has to do with an ideology. And if we can't discuss ideologies, then, we have a big problem in this country, because any sovereign nation has a right to sort of determine the nature not only of their own laws, but of their own, I guess you might say, political and social ethos. And, we do have laws, for example, in this country that ban Nazis, and should. So therefore, under the guise of looking at people who embrace, we have laws that ban white supremacists, and we should, from coming into this country. Any sovereign nation has a right to decide whether or not anyone entering into that nation intends to respect the laws of the land and the way of life of the land, and or not. And if there's a question about whether or not they do, then we ought to ask that question and make a determination. No one has a right to enter from nation A to nation B. There's no such thing in international law or custom. All people and all nations, all sovereign nations, have the right to decide who enters a national home, for the same reason that you as an individual has a right to decide who enters into your home, your private home. It's a natural thing. This is a principle that exists in nature. You don't enter a bird's nest unless you have permission from the bird. You don't enter the space of a dog unless, if you do, you're going to get your hand bit. Because animals understand that you have a right to a certain degree of sovereignty and control over your own space. And so just like you as an individual have that right, the nation has that right. That's why we have nations. That is why there exists sovereign nations. This is a very progressive idea. It's something which preserves democracy, it preserves freedom, it preserves society, it preserves culture. So, yes, we have a right to ask whether or not Islamic law is compatible with American democracy. And what I would suggest is that, for the most part, it is, but there are certain elements of it that are not, or that they may not be. And on that particular program, I did develop some of those elements, and that's what offended people, apparently, or some people, who filed a complaint against me for that. Anyway, the article goes on to say, and this is quoting me, since the influx of Muslim immigrants in this country, there has been an increase in these sorts of killings. Women can be killed, is how I started it. And for reasons that are quite interesting, the New York Times, which is the left-leaning establishment mouthpiece, doesn't report this. They'll report there was a killing, that a girl was killed by her father or by her brother, but they won't report that the family was Muslim. They leave that out. Now, my source on this is New York Times reporter William McGowan, who wrote a book called Gray Lady Down. It's about the New York Times. He's a pretty well-respected researcher. He's not some right-wing nut. His book was a pretty widely disseminated book, and that was my source on that piece of information. Take it or leave it. He says that the New York Times would report on what can be described as honor killings, but they would avoid mentioning that the family was Muslim so that no one would associate it as such. Instead, it was just another strange murder where some girl had been murdered by her father or some such incident. And there was an uptick of this in the greater New York area in particular that did accompany an increase in Islamic immigration into the United States. So, as a feminist, I am upset by that. I'm upset by the way women are treated in Islamic Sharia-compliant nations. I think women are treated like pieces of property. They don't appear to have any rights. There are elements of Islamic law which say that you can beat your wife. You can get divorced from your wife by simply declaring, I want a divorce 3 times. Women have no rights in divorce. Girls can be killed if they're seen out in public in the company of a man other than their brother or father. Apparently it's okay to have them killed because they've allegedly brought some kind of dishonor by doing so. We could look at Iran and the way women are treated. We could look at Saudi Arabia. There are a lot of examples of this. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the possibility that could be imported into the United States. It's oppressive. It is something that does run contrary to our American principle of equal rights. I mean, it's just, I stand by that as a feminist, and I wonder why other feminists don't agree with me on this, why I don't hear from them. Where are they on this? Isn't this anti-feminist to support these sorts of things, at least implicitly? They may not openly support it. They may not think they're supporting it. But by not discussing it frankly and openly and honestly, you are supporting it. So that's what that's motivated by. Okay, moving along here. Chuck Morse Speaks is a Tufts WMFO radio show at 10 a.m. on Thursdays. Since early this November, Morse talks about a range of current events in, quote, a racist and Islamophobic way, unquote, under the guise of the conservative perspective. Okay, so what this tells me, first of all, is that, and again, I don't blame the author of this article. I don't blame a lot of people for viewing it this way. But the fact is that I think due to, I don't want to use the word indoctrination because that might come down a little hard, but conditioning, let's put it that way. We have a lot of young people in this country who believe that anyone that doesn't genuflect to the left is a racist or is one of the other phobics. Hillary Clinton described it as the basket of deplorables, and she made a laundry list of these things, that these are people who don't genuflect to the left. And I would suggest to you respectfully that you might broaden your minds a little bit and think about the fact that there are people out there who have difference of opinions to yours, and that while you're not exposed to these opinions, so it may sound different in your ear, it has like almost a shock feeling to you because it's not what you're used to hearing, that these are opinions that are held on principle that they have nothing to do with racism or any of these other phobias, and that this is a piece of propaganda that is promoted by a left-wing establishment to squelch free speech. I deeply resent, first of all, being called a racist, and I'm saying this as a person of color myself. You have no idea what I am, what my background is. You have no idea what my attitudes are toward races or if I have any attitudes toward races. I do feel that racism is an issue in this country, which is why it bothers me that these kinds of charges can be thrown around so cavalierly at people when there's no evidence of it. And that what it does is essentially, at the end of the day, it cheapens the actual genuine problem of racism to the degree that we have that problem in this country. And I think we do, not as much as we did back in the 1950s and 60s when you had Jim Crow laws. But, yes, racism and discomfort over race and subtle discrimination, I don't deny that that's real. Of course it's real. I would also like to just briefly shift the table a little bit and point out that the genuine racist agendas in this country, at least in the de facto sense, today come from the left. And their racist policies that have hurt and in many cases damaged the African American family, the black faith, black entrepreneurialism, black opportunity, things like welfare. I mean, I could go on and other things, education, which I think is skewed, controlled largely by leftists, that I think has hurt black children and hurt the ability of young black students to think cognitively so they can achieve. A lot of our prisons, for example, are made up of young black men who are illiterate. There's a reason for that. That's not an accident. Anyway, so that's a subject that could be argued. But the point I'm making is that by simply throwing this attack against me is, it's not malicious on the part of the author of this article or the young people who were interviewed, these tough students, because you guys don't know any better. This is the milieu of which you exist, or you were brought up in. You don't think outside of it. So you don't mean it. I know it's not, you're not trying to hurt me personally. Maybe you are, but you know what I mean? It's not like, you actually believe that anything that doesn't genuflect to the left is racist. But the bigger picture with regard to people who are conscious and who are witting and who are adults and who have promoted this idea, those are the people that I hold to account for this kind of ugly personal assault against me, which is exactly what that is. Anyway, moving on to the article. Morse also identifies himself on air as Jewish, and says that it was immoral to deny Jews entry to the United States from Nazi Germany, which I do say. But letting in Muslims could change our society. Well, hey, again, this is a topic where reasonable people need to debate. I don't have anything against Muslim men and women. Just as a matter of public information, I should note that I happen to be an Uber driver. I drive Uber, right? I'm kind of a working guy here. And in the course of driving Uber, I have a lot of Muslim passengers, and I find them to be excellent people. Very friendly and very, very nice people. It's nothing personal. It has more to do with the fact that Islam teaches two principles that are not consistent with the West. And by the way, my Muslim passengers would agree with me on this, and have. And they also, and not to get into a sidebar here, but during the election, I did an informal polling of my passengers, and I noticed that a large number of my Muslim, African-American, Hispanic passengers were Trump supporters, but that's another subject. The point is that jihad and Sharia are inconsistent with our American approach. And by the way, I don't say this out of a sense of chauvinism that America or our Western values are superior, because we're not. We're worse. Because after all, was it not the Western Enlightenment that gave birth to the two evil weeds of socialism, those being Nazism and communism, which are far worse than Islam? They're atheist, they were utopian, they were, talk about Sharia law, they controlled for a complete nanny-state control over every aspect of the citizen's life. These were much more virulent and much more anti-American than Islam is. I think Islam actually, there's hope for Islam. It can be adopted mainly for what, if for no other reason than Muslims believe in God. Communists and Nazis don't. They believe in the state. So, I'm not here to preach. I do recognize that our Western civilization has been responsible for worse ideologies, ideologies that I would suggest should also not be welcomed into this country by foreigners en masse, and weren't, and for good reason. Anyway, getting back to the article here, again, reading from the article about me at the Tufts Observer called Morse Code. You could look it up. It says he goes just the ideology which he says seeks to destroy nation states worldwide. Again, I stand by that. I think that jihad is proven to be just that. It is an aggressive imperialist idea that seeks to submit the entire planet to Islam. Anybody who doesn't know that, you've got your head in the sand. You may not have been reading the paper on September the 11th of 2001. Why did they strike us? Why did they kill 3,000 Americans on that day? What did we do to deserve that? They did it because they want to destabilize the Western democracies, which they view as infidel. They view it as what's called in Arabic the Dar el-Ab, the world of war, while they live in the Dar es-Salam, the world of peace. The world of war is the part of the planet that has not submitted to Islam. The part of the planet that has is called the world of peace. Their utopian solution is a one-world government, which they call Dar el-Islam. That is a world that has entirely submitted. Now again, 99% of Muslims don't believe in this stuff, thank God. But this is what jihad's about. This is a world-conquering faith. And again, I'm not holding up the West as being superior, because that's exactly what both Nazism and communism were as well. The Nazis showed that in their blitzkrieg across Europe. The communists believe in world revolution to create a utopia where everyone is de facto equal. That's worse in a sense than the Islamic Jihad. So I'm criticizing the Islamic Jihad in that context here. All right? And I do reject those things. That doesn't mean that I have something against anyone based on their racial background. It has nothing to do with that. Getting back. Do we want to... Okay, blah, blah, blah. Morse is a middle-aged community member. Thanks a lot. I am, though. And DJ, he speaks favorably of Donald Trump, saying that his inaugural address is, quote, something by conventional meaning every school child should learn and read and memorize, unquote. And he's written several nonfiction books, which the author was nice enough to link to. I'm proud of my books, which have titles such as The Nazi Connection to Islamic Terrorism, Was Hitler a Leftist, and The War Against Judaism. I'm proud of my books. My books speak for themselves. If you'd like to look at my books, you're welcome to go on Amazon.com. I'm not saying this is a commercial. I'm not suggesting people buy them. You don't have to buy them. You can actually borrow them, and at no charge. So, but they're there. They speak for themselves. I am proud of my work. I've written over 50 nonfiction books. Thank you very much. All right, but the comment here about memorizing Donald Trump's inaugural address. Well, first of all, I didn't say all students have to memorize anything. It makes it sound like I'm being authoritarian here. But I do think that it's not a bad idea for high school civics classes to familiarize themselves with President Trump's inaugural address. It happens to be a brilliant speech. It's an exceptional speech. And in a sense, whether you like it or not, since Donald J. Trump is the President of the United States and will essentially or assumedly be for the next 4 to 8 years, this speech is worth reading for that reason alone. It lays out his beliefs, his philosophy, his agenda, what he has in mind. I mean, the speech kind of tells you pretty much everything you need to know about Donald Trump, about what he ran on, and about what he intends to do. So, like him or hate him, it's a good exercise in civics to read his speech. And as far as memorizing, yes, I think memorization is something that is good for young people. It's something that was discredited in the 1960s by the educrats, the change agents, but I would suggest that it actually can improve a person's ability to cognitively retain information. There is evidence to suggest that. It's a good idea to memorize poems or speeches, throughout your educational years. It's an exercise that used to be a standard part of education. It was done away with by the change agents who wanted to turn our schools into behavior factories rather than education places where people can think for themselves and think cognitively and thus go forth as independent, sovereign people. So, yeah, I stand by that. I think memorization is good. All right. Moving through the article here. In, quote, censorship at Tufts University, Morse said he believes that Tufts students are afraid to speak out because of bias reports, what he calls, quote, thought police. He said that Tufts has created an apparatus, a group of people who are taking phone calls from students who want to report someone who has engaged in politically incorrect conversation. He added that saying something racist in this day and age is unlikely and that what is offensive is a subjective decision. Now, what I'm talking about here is that Tufts University, like many colleges around the country, have set up a sort of an anti-bias organization that, at least implicitly, has police powers. They can investigate you. They can possibly have you expelled or disciplined. They certainly could hurt someone's reputation if they receive a report of someone engaging in what is called biased behavior. In fact, I think that's what I'm undergoing right now. I'm not even a student here. And yeah, I do think that this is chilling to free speech. I think that it's thought control. Yes, I do. I think that it creates, maybe unintentionally, I think it actually probably, there are intentions. It creates a sense of dread over expressing unpopular opinions. I do say that. Now, what then to do about genuine racist comments or bias or, comments? It says here, in contrast, for example, getting back to the article, Tufts defines a bias incident as, quote, any act directed against a person or property that includes the use of slurs or epithets expressing bias on the basis of race, color, national or ethnic origin, age, religion, disability, gender, sexual orientation, or gender identity and expression. Okay, so what do we do, therefore, about insulting comments that might be made to someone on these topics? Because I think it is a legitimate question. We don't want to have an atmosphere where people are bullied or people are, attacked in any way or insulted. This is an issue. The problem is that the solution is not to set up a policing organization that can destroy a person's career. I think that the solution, and maybe this sounds quaint, I don't know, but I would suggest that the solution to this is to return to chivalry, a sense of propriety with regard to how we relate to each other, and not to do it by force, not to have an external board, passing judgments unless something is so egregious. Obviously there are laws against rape and sexual harassment and any kind of physical force. That's another agency. I'm not talking about that. That's an appropriate thing. I mean, those are crimes. People should be brought to justice for that, into the fullest extent of the law. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about insulting comments that are being raised to the level, not necessarily of crime, but almost of crime, of a quasi-crime. And I think that the answer, rather than to criminalize, rather than to threaten, is to simply teach, as a matter of course, manners, chivalry, that we don't comment about other people's race. We don't talk about other people's sexual orientation or their gender or their ethnic background. It's not polite. You know? You don't know how someone else relates to these things. You know, in a polite society, we generally ought to consider, giving people space and avoiding comments of a personal nature. Even among friends, unless someone is willing to permit it, it's not polite to talk about these things. Unless you get a sort of a permission. You say, do you mind if I bring up a subject here? There's a way to go about it. It's called manners. It's called chivalry. And it's something that has gone by the wayside and has been replaced by this assumption, quite wrongly, that people are not going to be polite, that people are inherently, for example, racist and sexist and all of these things, and therefore it requires an external policing apparatus to enforce this and to punish people. I don't believe that people are inherently any of these things. I don't think most people are that at all. And I think that, in a sense, when that does happen, and when people are making rude comments, it's a much better approach to sort of apply social pressure, to say to them, this is a wrong thing to say, don't say it again, it's offensive to me. And that if they do say it again and they say it continuously, then maybe someone's waving a flag, and at that point you report it to not necessarily this agency, but maybe your professor or someone in a lower position of authority than some external policing group. This is like what they do in communist China, where they have like somebody who is watching the block for comments that might be deemed politically incorrect, things that are seen as anathema or in opposition to the state. Now, I understand that comments about someone's race is not that, but I would suggest that setting up an apparatus by which people get reported is a step in that direction, at least to me. And again, I'm looking at this not as a student, not as a professor, not as someone who is really directly involved in this or any other academic institution, but as a complete outsider looking in and seeing this as such a trend. I hope people can respect that. I would suggest that this does have a chilling effect on speech. I've noticed this, quite frankly, here at Tufts, in that, and I know this is completely anecdotal, but I did a broadcast here at Tufts in the late 1990s for a time. I think it was maybe about a year, maybe about a half a year, whatever. 1998, 1997, around that time. And then I went off to do other things, and I'm now back here, almost 20 years later. And I do notice a difference in young people. Back then, people were more open, more boisterous. You did have opposing opinions. I had a whole line of very conservative, even you might say right-wing guests, people who were, lawyers and professors and authors. And, nobody thought twice about it. They thought it was interesting. People debated me. People would come on the air. Back then, I used to debate on other radio shows a lot of liberals. In fact, on this program, back in 1996, I debated Congressman Barney Frank. I had on Noam Chomsky. People would come on with me and we would debate. And we would not agree, but we would have a ribald and reasonable discussion. I've noticed that now you don't have that anymore. Nobody wants to talk to me anymore. And it's not because of me personally. It's because liberals do not want to talk any longer with conservatives. Everybody has kind of closed the tent. There's been a sort of a hardening, a bitterness, a tightening, a narrowing of people's views. And so I don't get people to come on anymore. I've noticed that students here And again, I'm using anecdotal evidence here. I haven't had a lot of contacts with people here. I've had some. I've gone to some of the meetings. I've seen people come and go here. I've gone through the trainings. And I've noticed that there's just much more docility, much more passivity when it comes to discussions of politics and ethics and culture. People avoid it. They don't want to talk about it. And I understand that, because you get this group of policemen that I'm criticizing, this censorship group, this apparatus. I mean, nobody wants to stick their neck out. You come to a college like Tufts University, which is a very elite institution, and your parents, they could be paying upwards of $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year for you to attend this college. You have a reputation to preserve. You don't want to stick your neck out. You don't want to criticize. You don't want to be seen criticizing a professor, for example, most of which are on the left. You don't want to take a diverse opinion because it could hurt your grades. It could hurt your reputation if you get reported. Somebody may think that you violated their safe space. They may think you've used a trigger word. These are all repackaged, old-fashioned, leftist, totalitarian concepts that are being reintroduced under new names. So you have an atmosphere of passivity here now, in general. I'm not being, and I understand it, as I said, because, if I were here, or, I wouldn't want to rock the boat either. You want to get through the thing, you want to keep your head low, and do what you have to do, and make the most of it. And also, there's social pressure. You want to be popular, you want to go to the parties, you want to be with one of the beautiful people, you want to be part of the in crowd, so you conform. And to an extent, that's natural, but I think it's become more extreme in that I think people purge out of their minds opposition ideas. They stop thinking about them, if they ever did. And thus, when you have someone like me come along, who's broadcasting right here at the heart of this college, and who is sort of an outsider, who introduces ideas, then yeah, I can understand where it triggers all these thoughts. This must be racist. It must be, Islamophobic or whatever. Because it's foreign to you. Because it shakes and rattles your rather carefully constructed cage. And because it, in a sense, it threatens what you've been taught. Threatens your worldview. So, moving along in the article here, I say on the show he compared the system of communist China. Tufts isn't that bad, and I'm quoting here. But we seem to be moving in that direction, Morse said. Do we want a society where comments we don't agree with are reported to the authorities? Yeah, I stand by that. When Junior and Tufts Observer... Okay, we're getting into names of people. I'm not going to mention this guy's name, even though he gave an interview to the station. I just don't want to mention people's names on the air. So this was a student that was interviewed. He's on the staff. He first heard the show playing a few days before the recent presidential election at Brown and Brew, which is the coffee bar right here at the first floor of Curtis Hall. Apparently they play the program. I'm up here on the third floor at the radio station. He was surprised and upset to hear Morse speaking about the gender fluidity movement. Now, I don't recall saying much about that. I probably did. I don't know. I don't have a big issue with that. I think people, you might have noticed that earlier in this broadcast today, I made the comment that I am a person of color. Now, some people would say, no, you're not, you're white. But I happen to know that I am because recently I did a DNA test of my ethnic background, and I discovered that I am only 4.5% of European ancestry, which tells me that I am 95.5% a non-European ancestry. Thus, I'm a person of color. All right? And also growing up in a neighborhood where most people were white, people did think of me that way. They certainly did think of me as different, racially, certainly, and certainly ethnically. I was Jewish. And as a Jew, I was not thought of as white. I would contend that as a Jew, I'm not white. So that's my right to say that. Now, if someone can say that, they are biologically born male or female, and then they decide that they want to be the other gender for whatever reason, or that they want to be gender fluid and say, well, I want to be a little male, a little female, maybe both, maybe neither. If you can support that, then you can support my right to be racially fluid. So I'll just I'll just make that observation. I mean, ultimately, when it comes to gender, I think it's a little bit more. It has a little bit more of a meaning biologically, in terms of what gender you're born into, than racial, because racism is just more of a social construct. What does it mean? It's a mystery, actually. It doesn't mean anything. Whereas if you're born male or born female, that does have a bit more of a meaning physically, emotionally, not mentally, because mentally people are the same, but it's more, there are differences between men and women. So there are, that's an issue that is interesting to me. Again, when I bring that up, it's not because I have anything against anybody. People, people have a right to their own sexuality, however it's expressed, and I don't see it as anyone's business. Again, it's a private matter. It's not something that anyone has a right to come in and declare for someone else. We all deal with whatever our sexual peccadillos are. I mean, that's personal. That's not. So I'm not criticizing that, and I don't think that people, it's anybody's business if somebody wants to put on a dress and go into a woman's room.